The air in the tent they called the summit was a thin gruel of contradictions. It smelled of stale beer, diesel fumes, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone from the overworked generator that fought a losing battle against the encroaching cold. The canvas walls, stained with the ghosts of 100 sandstorms, flapped and snapped in the relentless high-altitude wind, a sound like a volley of distant, irregular rifle fire. This was Forward Operating Base Apex, a lonely molar of rock and steel jammed into the jagged gum line of a mountain range so remote it was known to cartographers only by a string of numbers. It was a place where authority was measured in decibels, and the quietest thing present was the crushing, indifferent silence of the peaks that loomed over them. In this cathedral of noise and unearned confidence, she was an anomaly of silence. She sat alone at a wobbly table fashioned from an ammunition crate and a sheet of dented aluminum, a bottle of water her only companion. She was unremarkable to the point of being a void. Her hair was a nondescript brown, pulled back in a severe, functional knot. Her face was plain, unadorned by makeup, and her expression was one of placid neutrality. Her eyes scanning the room not with interest, but with the dispassionate sweep of a sensor array gathering ambient data. She wore what appeared to be a simple, dark gray dress over a pair of thick, black thermal leggings and sturdy boots, an attire so out of place in this world of camouflage and tactical gear that it acted as a form of reverse camouflage, making her paradoxically more invisible. She did not speak. She did not fidget. She simply occupied space, a single point of stillness in a universe of frantic, masculine energy. That energy was currently personified by Sergeant Rex Thorne, United States Marine Corps, Scout Sniper. Thorne, known to his acolytes as Ripper, was the unofficial monarch of the summit. His face looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself, all sharp angles and sun-cured leather, his jaw perpetually set in a state of belligerent readiness. He moved through the cramped space not like a man walking, but like a predator patrolling the borders of his territory. Authority radiated from him, not the quiet, earned authority of a seasoned leader, but the loud, brittle authority of a man terrified of being seen as anything less than the most dangerous person in any room he entered. He was holding court, his voice a gravelly boom that effortlessly cut through the tent's cacophony, regaling a rapt audience of younger, less decorated Marines with a story that grew more heroic with each telling. His gaze, accustomed to acquiring targets at 1,000 yards, swept the room and snagged on the woman. He stopped mid-sentence. His cronies followed his eye-line, their smirks and murmurs rippling outward from the sergeant like a shockwave. To Thorne, her presence was more than an anomaly. It was an insult. It was a disruption in the natural order of his world, a world meticulously constructed of rigid hierarchies, unspoken codes, and a deep, abiding suspicion of anything soft, quiet, or feminine. A civilian, a woman in his space, dressed as if she were heading to a library in a quiet university town. It was an affront to the grit, the hardship, the very identity he had forged in the crucible of this desolate outpost. He saw not a person, but a symbol of the soft, comfortable world that existed somewhere beyond the razor wire and the mountain peaks, a world he professed to despise but secretly craved validation from. He saw a challenge to his self-appointed status as the alpha predator. The lion does not suffer a gazelle to drink at its waterhole without comment, and Sergeant Rex Thorne, in the small, dusty kingdom of FOB Apex, was a lion. He pushed himself away from the makeshift bar, the legs of his stool scraping against the plywood floor. The laughter around him died, replaced by the electric hum of anticipation. This was a familiar ritual, the public identification and ritual humiliation of an outsider. It was how the tribe reinforced its boundaries. Well, well, Thorne's voice sliced through the tense general din, drawing every eye. What do we have here? He sauntered over to her table, his movements deliberately slow and exaggerated, a pantomime of dominance. His shadow fell across her, a stain of darkness on her small patch of light. She did not look up. She continued to stare into the middle distance, as if he were nothing more than a passing cloud. This inaction, this complete lack of acknowledgement, was a greater offense than any retort could have been. It pricked the thin membrane of his ego. Lost, little lady? He sneered, leaning over her table, planting his thick-knuckled hands on its surface. The smell of cheap whiskey and self-satisfaction washed over her. The officers' club is 2 valleys over and a whole lot fancier than this dump. This here is a working man's place. Still, she did not respond. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. The quiet discipline of the movement, the utter lack of fear or even irritation, was unnerving. It was like shouting at a rock. It refused to give him the reaction he needed, the fear or anger that would validate his power. The other Marines shifted on their feet, their expectant grins tightening into expressions of confusion. The script was not being followed. Thorne's face darkened. His performance was falling flat. He needed to escalate. His eyes fell upon her dress, the simple, functional garment that was the source of his initial offense. He straightened up, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He gestured grandly at her, as if presenting a specimen to a curious crowd. "Nice dress," he barked, the words dripping with a thick, syrupy sarcasm. A few of his followers let out forced, nervous laughs. "Really ties the whole war zone chic look together. Did you get lost on your way to a cocktail party?" The insult, designed to be a crushing blow, landed with all the impact of a raindrop on a battleship's hull. Finally, the woman moved. She slowly raised her head, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was nothing in them. No anger, no fear, no indignation. It was the calm, analytical gaze of a geologist examining a piece of granite. She assessed him, catalogued him, and filed him away in a single, silent moment. Her lack of emotional response was a vacuum, and Thorne's blustering ego rushed to fill it. He felt a hot flush of rage. She was making him look foolish, not through defiance, but through sheer, baffling indifference. She spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying a strange resonance that cut through the noise of the tent more effectively than his shout had. It was a voice devoid of inflection, a statement of pure data. "I am where I am supposed to be, Sergeant." The use of his rank was a precise, surgical cut. It acknowledged his status while simultaneously dismissing his authority over her. It was a statement of fact, not an appeal. The other Marines fell silent. This was no longer amusing. The woman was not behaving like a victim. She was behaving like something else. Something they did not have a category for. She was a lioness allowing a jackal to dance at the edge of its kill radius, and the jackal was too arrogant to recognize the danger. Thorne felt his control slipping. He had initiated a public dominance display, and he was losing. His reputation in this small, enclosed ecosystem depended on never losing. He had to force a reaction, to break her composure. He slammed his open palm down on the table, a crack of sound that made several men flinch. Her water bottle jumped, but it did not spill. She did not so much as blink. He leaned in close, his face inches from hers, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You think you're special? You think the rules don't apply to you? You're a tourist here, sweetheart. And in my AO, tourists follow the rules." He was invading her personal space, a classic tactic of physical intimidation designed to trigger a primal fear response. He expected her to recoil, to shrink away, to finally show the fear that he was entitled to see. Instead, she did something that completely unraveled him. She made a small, precise adjustment, sliding her chair back perhaps 3 inches. It was not a retreat. It was a recalibration. It was the exact, economical motion a master duelist might make to re-establish optimal range. It was a tactical adjustment, not an emotional reaction. In that tiny, controlled movement, she communicated a level of self-possession so profound it bordered on inhuman. She had just field-stripped his attempt at intimidation and found it wanting. He was left standing there, leaning over an empty patch of table, his threat hanging impotently in the air. Before Thorne could formulate a response, before he could process the sheer scale of his miscalculation, the world ended. It began with a sound, a low, guttural moan from the mountains themselves. It was a sound that vibrated not in the ears, but in the bones, in the fillings of one's teeth. The generator outside coughed, sputtered, and died. The tent was plunged into an emergency-lit twilight, the red glow casting long, dancing shadows that turned familiar faces into demonic masks. Then the wind hit. It was not a gust. It was a solid wall of force, a physical blow that made the entire tent structure scream in protest. A high-pitched shriek tore through the air as the main siren on the command post spun up, its wail a prophecy of doom. "White Viper!" someone screamed. "It's a White Viper!" The name was a local legend, a meteorological bogeyman, a high-altitude blizzard of such sudden, savage intensity that it could bury the entire FOB in 20 feet of snow in under an hour. It was a storm that didn't just rage, it hunted. The temperature inside the tent plummeted as if a door had been opened into deep space. The canvas rippled violently, and with a sound like tearing flesh, a massive seam along the roof split open. A torrent of wind and blindingly white snow blasted into the room, sending men, tables, and equipment tumbling. Panic, the great equalizer, erupted. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the bar dissolved into a chaotic scramble for survival. Men who had faced enemy fire with courage were now shouting and stumbling in the dark, their training useless against the raw, elemental fury of the storm. Sergeant Thorne, his public humiliation instantly forgotten, defaulted to his training. He began barking orders, his voice a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. "Get the storm shutters on the tocks. Secure that rip in the canvas. Grab the emergency heaters." His orders were correct, by-the-book responses. They were also utterly, hopelessly inadequate. It was like trying to patch a hole in a dam with chewing gum. The storm was too big, too fast, too violent. His loud, confident commands were swallowed by the roar of the wind, his authority rendered meaningless. He was a master of controlled, predictable violence. But this was something else entirely. This was the planet itself trying to shrug them off its back. He stood in the center of the chaos he was failing to manage, his face a mask of dawning fear. Conventional authority had failed. And then, through the maelstrom, a new signal emerged from the noise. The woman, the object of his scorn, the quiet anomaly, rose from her chair. She moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with the frantic, jerky movements of everyone else. The wind that sent hardened Marines staggering seemed to part around her. The chaos did not touch her. She was the eye of the hurricane, a zone of impossible calm. She walked past the shouting, ineffectual Thorn without a glance, her steps measured and certain. Her destination was the small, shielded section of the tent that housed the FOB's Tactical Operations Center, a cramped space now lit by the flickering, failing screens of the comms gear. She reached the main communications console, a complex bank of radios and monitors that was now displaying nothing but static and error messages. The comms specialist, a young lance corporal with terror in his eyes, was frantically trying to re-establish a connection, his hands shaking too badly to properly tune the knobs. The woman gently but firmly placed a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, and something in her impossibly calm eyes seemed to drain the panic from him. "Step aside," she said. The words were not a request. They were a statement of operational necessity. She slid into the chair, and her hands moved over the console. They did not move with the frantic energy of the specialist, but with the slow, deliberate precision of a surgeon. She ignored the primary satellite link. It was clearly gone, a casualty of the storm's electromagnetic fury. Her fingers danced across a secondary keyboard, typing in lines of code that were not part of any standard Marine Corps operating manual. The screen flickered, shifting from a friendly user interface to a raw command line prompt. She picked up a dead handset and spoke into it, her voice still calm, still devoid of emotion. A stark contrast to the howling wind and the panicked shouts of the men. Apex command to any orbital asset in listening cone Bravo 7. Executing emergency protocol Vance Theta. I am bypassing standard handshake. Authenticate on my signal. I require real-time atmospheric density and ionization data for Quadrant Sierra 9. Now. The language was alien. It was a foreign tongue of expertise, a dialect spoken only by a select few who understood the fundamental physics of global communications. Thorn, who had followed her, stood frozen just inside the TOS, his jaw slack. Vance Theta? Orbital asset? What was she talking about? This was not how you used a radio. You followed a script. You identified yourself. You waited for a response. You did not simply command the heavens to answer. A speaker crackled, not with a voice, but with a series of digital chirps, a sound like a robotic bird. It was a data stream, raw and unfiltered. She listened for a moment, her head cocked, then nodded to herself. "As I thought," she murmured. "The storm's leading edge has created a temporary tropospheric duct. We can bounce a signal." She turned to the stunned comms specialist and two other Marines who had gathered, drawn by the sheer force of her competence. "I need two of you. Outside, you will go to the secondary sensor array, panel gamma. You will manually realign it. Azimuth 097. Elevation to 41.3 degrees. Precisely. The static charge differential between the ground and the ion saturation layer will act as a passive reflector. We have a window of approximately 90 seconds. Move." It was an order of breathtaking complexity and absurdity. She was telling them to use the storm itself, the very thing that was trying to kill them, as a piece of communications equipment. It was insane. But the certainty in her voice, the undeniable aura of absolute mastery, was more compelling than any rank. The two Marines, without a moment's hesitation, simply nodded and plunged out into the blizzard. She turned back to the console, her fingers flying. She was no longer just operating the equipment. She was communing with it, coaxing it, rewriting its very purpose on the fly. She was playing the storm like a musical instrument, using its destructive energy to carve a narrow channel through the chaos. The men in the tent, including Thorn, had stopped trying to fight the storm. They were now standing in silent, huddled groups, their attention fixed on the small woman in the gray dress, who was single-handedly waging a war against physics and winning. It was a masterclass in a discipline they didn't even know existed. They were witnessing something far beyond competence. They were witnessing a form of genius so profound it felt like magic. The speaker crackled again, a voice, faint and distorted by static, but unmistakably human, cut through the noise. "Ed, you faint but clear, Apex. Repeat, we have a faint but clear signal, confirming receipt of telemetry package. My God, who is running your comms?" At that exact moment, the main flap of the tent was ripped open, not by the wind, but by a large, powerful figure clad head to toe in snow-caked extreme weather gear. The man tore off his goggles, revealing the weathered, authoritative face of Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole, the FOB's Sergeant Major. He was a legend, a man who had served in every major conflict for the past 30 years, and his presence alone was enough to quell the remaining panic. He stomped into the tent, his eyes blazing, ready to take command. "What in the hell is going on here? Report!" he bellowed, his voice a force of nature in its own right. His eyes swept the scene of chaos, and then, like thorns before him, they landed on the woman at the comms console, but his reaction was profoundly different. The anger in his face did not curdle into confusion. It evaporated, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes widened. His jaw dropped. He recognized her. Cole's entire body seemed to change. The grizzled, combat-hardened warrior vanished, replaced by a soldier in the presence of royalty. His back straightened into a rod of iron. His heels snapped together with a sound that was somehow audible over the roar of the wind. He drew in a sharp breath and unleashed a command that shook the very foundations of the tent, a command so utterly shocking in its context that it brought the world to a dead stop. "Attention on deck!" It was a command reserved for the arrival of a flag officer, a general, or an admiral. It was a sound no one at FOB Apex had ever expected to hear. Instinct, drilled into them by years of training, took over. Every man in the tent, from the lowest private to Sergeant Rex Thorne, snapped to the rigid, formal position of attention, their bodies ramrod straight, their eyes locked forward. They did not know why they were doing it, but the sheer, primal authority in the Master Gunnery Sergeant's voice gave them no choice. Cole, himself locked at a perfect brace, did not take his eyes off the woman. He spoke, his voice now laced with a tone of reverence and profound respect that bordered on awe. "Dr. Vance, my apologies. I was not aware you were on site. The Major was escorting your transport when the storm hit." The name descended upon the room like a physical weight. Dr. Vance. Not a captain, not a colonel, but a doctor. The title hung in the air, charged with a significance that no one yet understood, but everyone felt. The narrator, in that moment, could have stepped in and painted the full picture for the stunned onlookers. He could have told them that Dr. Alara Vance was the civilian lead for DARPA's Project Chimera, the architect of the very global command and control network that was currently failing everywhere, except this one miserable tent on a forgotten mountaintop. He could have explained that her name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the Pentagon and at Fort Meade, a ghost in the machine, a legend known only by classified code names like Athena or the Weaver. He could have explained that her simple gray dress was not cotton, but a proprietary blend of Nomex and spider silk, interwoven with a biometric sensor mesh that was feeding her vital signs directly into a secure server halfway around the world. Her presence here was not an accident. She was overseeing the final clandestine installation of a revolutionary piece of quantum encryption technology, a system so advanced it would make all current forms of electronic warfare obsolete overnight. But the narrator did not need to. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle revealed itself. As Dr. Vance turned slightly in her chair to adjust a control, the sleeve of her dress rode up her forearm by a few inches. And there, revealed in the dim red light of the dying emergency lamps, was a small, faded tattoo. It was an image every man in that room knew by heart, an icon of martial prowess more revered than any medal, an eagle clutching an anchor, a trident, and a flintlock pistol. The special warfare insignia, the sealed trident. The revelation hit the room with the force of a detonation. It was a psychic blast that shattered every assumption, every prejudice, every smug certainty. The quiet woman in the dress, the civilian, the tourist. She was not just a genius scientist who had tamed a blizzard. She was one of them, but more than them. She was a member of the most elite and demanding warrior fraternity on the planet. The silence in the tent was now absolute, broken only by the howl of the wind, which suddenly seemed less menacing, like a wild beast that had just been tamed by an unseen master. Rex Thorne stood frozen at the position of attention, his body rigid but his mind collapsing inward. The floor had dropped out of his universe. He had not just insulted a civilian. He had publicly mocked and attempted to intimidate a figure who existed on a plane of existence so far above his own that it defied comprehension. He was a sergeant who had tried to bully a living legend. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, acid burn that started in his stomach and spread through his entire body. He felt his face flush, a crimson tide of utter and complete humiliation. Every condescending word he had spoken, every arrogant sneer now replayed in his mind, each one a fresh lash of self-loathing. He had not just made a mistake, he had committed a sacrilege. Hours later, the White Viper had passed, leaving behind a world of pristine, deadly white. The fob was battered but intact, thanks largely to the clear, precise instructions Dr. Vance had continued to issue until full communications and power were restored. The crisis was over, and the time for reckoning had begun. Vance stood near the now-patched rip in the canvas, sipping from a fresh bottle of water. The returned FOB commander, a flustered but grateful major, stood beside her, along with Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole. Rex Thorne was ordered to stand before them. He marched forward, his movements stiff and robotic, and came to a halt 3 paces in front of her. He could not bring himself to meet her eyes. He stared at a point on the ground just past her feet, waiting for the axe to fall. "Sergeant Thorne," the major began, his voice tight with fury. "What you did today was not just unprofessional. It was a disgrace to this command and to the uniform of the United States Marine Corps. I am initiating proceedings for a general court-martial. You'll be lucky if you're not dishonorably discharged." Thorne did not react. He accepted it. He deserved it. But then Vance held up a single hand, a gesture that instantly silenced the major. She took a step toward Thorne, and he finally forced himself to look at her. The analytical calm was still there in her eyes, but now he could see something else behind it. A deep, weary intelligence that had seen 1,000 versions of him before. "A court-martial is inefficient, Major," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of ultimate authority. She addressed Thorne directly. "Your assessment of my attire was irrelevant. An error in social judgment. Annoying, but tactically meaningless." She paused, letting the words hang in the cold air. Your failure to accurately assess the atmospheric threat based on the available barometric data, however, was a critical tactical error. Your attempt to impose a standard command structure on a non-standard crisis was a failure of imagination. You looked at me and saw a civilian woman in a dress. You failed to see a strategic asset with mission-critical knowledge. You mistook the signal for the noise, Sergeant. That is a failure of battlefield analysis. It is the kind of failure that gets people killed. Her words were not angry. They were far worse. They were clinical, a dispassionate deconstruction of his professional soul. She was not punishing him for insulting her. She was dissecting his failure as a Marine. "He does not require punishment," she continued, turning back to the Major. "He requires education. Effective tomorrow at 0600. Sergeant Thorne is temporarily reassigned from his sniper platoon and is attached to my technical staff for the duration of my deployment. He will be my primary assistant. He will carry my diagnostic kit. He will log my data. He will learn the difference between a weapon and an asset, between posturing and preparedness. He will learn to see the whole battlefield. Is that understood, Major?" The Major, stunned by the subversion of military justice, could only nod. "Yes, Doctor. Understood." Vance looked back at Thorne, her gaze unwavering. "Dismissed, Sergeant. My gear is heavy. Be ready at 0600. And so began the longest month of Rex Thorne's life. He became Dr. Vance's shadow. He followed her through the freezing cold as she calibrated sensors on the wind-blasted ridges. He sat in silence in the corner of the talk as she held encrypted conversations with generals and admirals whose names he had only ever seen stenciled on the sides of buildings. He carried her diagnostic kit, a case filled with tools and devices so advanced they looked like science fiction props. He learned about quantum entanglement, signal propagation theory, and the esoteric mathematics of cryptography. She rarely spoke to him directly, but she was always teaching. She would leave technical manuals on his bunk. She would ask him to calculate firing solutions not for a rifle, but for a directed energy transmission. She forced him to see the world not as a linear battlefield of friends and foes, but as a complex, interconnected system of assets, variables, and probabilities. She was dismantling his worldview piece by piece and rebuilding it into something larger, more nuanced, and infinitely more effective. He learned that the most powerful weapon was not the one that made the loudest noise, but the one that controlled the flow of information. He learned that true authority was not claimed by shouting, but was granted to those who possessed undeniable competence. He learned humility, a lesson more brutal and more permanent than any brig time could have ever been. The story of that day, of course, passed into legend. It became a piece of institutional folklore, a modern military fable told in hushed tones in bars and training barracks from Camp Pendleton to Okinawa. They called it the dress at Ephob Apex, or the day Ripper Thorne met Athena. The details grew with each telling. The storm became a Category 5 hurricane, the dress became a ball gown, and Dr. Vance was said to have redirected a satellite with her mind. But the core truth of the story remained. It became a powerful teaching tool, a cautionary tale about the mortal danger of making assumptions. 5 years passed. The setting was now a classroom at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School in Quantico, Virginia. The instructor stood before a class of young, confident Marines, each one possessing the same brand of arrogant swagger he once had. But the instructor was different now. His voice was calm, his movements were measured, and his eyes held a quiet wisdom that had been forged in the crucible of a profound humiliation. It was Gunnery Sergeant Rex Thorne. "Your rifle can see 1,000 yards," he told the class, his voice resonating with an authority that was now truly earned. It can see a target's shape, its movement, its size, but it cannot see what is in a person's head. It cannot see their knowledge. It cannot see their history. The most dangerous threat on the battlefield is never the one you can see. It's the one you underestimate. It's the one you dismiss because it doesn't fit your picture of what a threat is supposed to look like. He tapped a small, simple brass plaque that was bolted to the wall of the classroom. It was the only decoration in the otherwise Spartan room. "I was once the best sniper in my battalion," he said, his voice dropping. "I was arrogant, and I made an assumption about a person in a simple gray dress. That assumption was the biggest tactical error of my career. It almost got a lot of people killed. It ended my career as a sniper, and it started my life as an instructor." He looked each young Marine in the eye. "Read the plaque. Memorize it. Live it. Because the lesson I learned the hard way might just save your life one day." The recruits looked at the plaque. Engraved in the brass were a few simple words, a quote attributed to Dr. Alara Vance. It read, "The most dangerous variable on any battlefield is the one you refuse to see." The story of Dr. Vance and Sergeant Thorne is more than just a tale of a mistaken identity and a humbled bully. It is a lesson carved into the very bedrock of professional conduct, a moral that transcends the military context and speaks to a universal truth. It is a reminder that true strength is rarely loud. True competence does not need to advertise. Authority that must be announced is no authority at all. The most formidable forces in the world are often the ones that operate in silence, cloaked in humility and an unassuming exterior. It is a testament to the idea that substance will always, in the end, triumph over style. The world is full of noise, of posturing and performance, of individuals who build their identities on a foundation of volume and aggression. But these are the brittle structures, the hollow shells that shatter in the first winds of a true crisis. The real foundations, the ones upon which lives and missions depend, are built of quieter, stronger materials. Knowledge, discipline, and a profound and humble respect for the vastness of what one does not know. The story teaches us to look past the uniform, the title, the gender, the dress, and to seek out the quiet competence that is the true hallmark of the master. It is a call to let our actions be our only argument, to let our skill be our only credential, and to remember that the person you are most tempted to dismiss might just be the one person you should be listening to the most.